Hey there, alley cats! Ooh, that's a nickname we haven't used for a while. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue like it used to. But welcome back to Movie Monday. We're gonna try something new today that is very much not at all like my normal film reviews. One of the YouTubers whose content I greatly enjoy, A Jello Apocalypse, has a bunch of very enjoyable videos reviewing movies in 10 words or less. I have no idea if he started this concept, but it's certainly become a trend across ReviewTube, some even already reviewing every Marvel Cinematic Universe movie in 10 words or less. So needless to say, this type of video is not my original idea, and I want to give credit where it's due, and Jello Apocalypse was the primary inspiration behind this video. I've posted a couple full reviews for more recent MCU films, but I wanted to do the rest in this fashion rather than give each their own designated video, because realistically, if I was to try to review every one of the 23 movies, it would take a ridiculously long time. Even when I did the video reviewing the entire Saw series, which is only 7 movies, almost a third of the MCU, in one single video, it took many months, and the video itself was an hour long. And quite honestly, I doubt anyone wants to binge through 23 full videos anyway. I'll be reviewing every film in the first 3 phases of the MCU, including ones I've already made videos on, because why not? My channel, my rules. And I'll also be doing them in chronological order to the series timeline, since that was the order I first binged most of these movies in to prepare for the release of Avengers Endgame. I would like to take a moment to remind everyone that these reviews are just my own opinion. If you disagree, that's fine. We don't have to have the exact same thoughts on a movie. So please hold off on your torches and pitchforks, at least until the end of the video. So with that said, let's get right into it. Here is every MCU film reviewed in 10 words or less. America! Fuck yeah! Coming to save the motherfucking day, yeah! Now she'll help save Earth in the future, right? Right? Aw, baby's first MCU movie. So, how many side plots are we adding here? Yes, really might as well just skip this one. All these Dutch angles make my neck hurt. Who needs continuity anyway? Just when I thought Pepper Potts couldn't be more obnoxious. Oh hey, Thor is back. Shame the twist was ruined because the internet exists. What's sad? Product placement, the movie! Basically Iron Man, but with ants. And kinda worse. That airport fight scene, oh, so epic. Mary Jane gets replaced by a cringy wannabe edgy knockoff. This movie is quite strange. Oh, this one's really gonna piss people off. Moving on. Third time's the charm, I guess. Physics, subatomic, quantum realm science! Wonderful mashup of all characters with a very solid villain. I love you 3000. Wait, we aren't done yet? Oh, that's awkward. Well, that was a lot. Some great and some really not great. I think overall they played it a bit too safe with the MCU starting out and were afraid to really get bold and creative until they knew the franchise would be a financial success and audiences would respond well to at least most releases. So they definitely improved quite a bit as the series went on. Now let's get more specific and talk about which ones I enjoyed the most and which ones were just awful, starting at the bottom and working our way up. Number 3, Thor. I'm in a bit of a pickle since the 2 worst I'm fairly solid about, but then the rest of the films on the lower end of the spectrum are all around the same level of meh. So I just have to pick out of those which one I dislike the most, which is definitely Thor. I almost chose Iron Man 3 because it subverted expectations in one of the worst ways, because what everyone thought was one of Iron Man's most iconic villains ended up being only an anticlimactic joke. And Pepper Potts is way more obnoxious than usual, but at least it had some pretty badass action sequences without going too over the top. And you may be wondering, why not choose Thor: The Dark World? Notoriously, that one is regarded as the worst, and it is certainly more bland overall, but for me, the first Thor is just the slightest percentage worse than the second, to the point where it actually makes me annoyed, whereas the second, I just have no feelings for at all. I mean, for fuck's sake, why are there so many Dutch angles? Did they only have one broken tripod or something and couldn't afford to get a new one? All the characters are annoying in their own ways starting out, which makes it difficult to root for anyone. And it's not possible for me to really care about this movie at all. Number 2, The Incredible Hulk. This is a sequel to the last Marvel Hulk film outside of the MCU, but it's also a reboot, so it's like a prequel or a C-boot? I don't even know. This movie was doomed from the start. It feels out of place compared to the rest of the MCU, probably because it's the only one made by Universal Studios. There's no one specific thing that made it bad, it's just boring overall and more bland than just outright terrible. This movie is the peak of the series taking itself too seriously and not having fun with it. And the funniest moments are entirely unintentional as the result of pure cringe and awkwardness. Especially watching through it alongside all the other MCU films, it lacks the charm and comic book feel that most of the rest have. Even those that are really corny, they're at least fun, but this is just mediocre, predictable, and forgettable. It ended up being one of those movies where shortly after watching, I forget everything that happened because I wanted to rush through it to see Mark Ruffalo's far superior portrayal of Bruce Banner. Nothing against Edward Norton, but he just doesn't bring anything special to this role, and some people are better suited for certain characters than others. In between Edward Norton not really doing the best portrayal of the character and the CGI making the Hulk look more goofy than anything, I can't really say this is a decent Hulk movie. Number 1, Captain Marvel. For the MCU's first female superhero lead, you'd think they would have done a much better job than what we ended up with in Captain Marvel. It is in no way related to Brie Larson or the stupid controversy going on shortly before the movie was released that upset every incel who had their poor fifis hurt so badly they bombed Rotten Tomatoes with negative reviews before the film was even out, to the point where the site had to remove that feature. Brie Larson has proven she is a capable Oscar-winning actress, whether she met the standard of what some had envisioned for this adaptation or not. She herself is not the problem here. The character she portrays, Carol Danvers, has the personality of a wet paper towel, and barely acts as more than a plot device in her own film, being moved around for the purposes of all other characters involved in some vague galaxy-wide race war. Because the writing is so exceptionally lazy and inconsistent and doesn't allow for any sort of character growth or development, with such a baffling amount of plot holes and continuity issues to the rest of the series, it makes me die a little inside. Everyone around her keeps saying that her emotions are her biggest problem, but we get almost none of that, since they equivocate emotions to using her powers because they don't want her to, without an ounce of any sort of character shining through. She, and by proxy us as the audience, have to be told everything about her personality and who she essentially was before she got amnesia. Her talent, her piloting skills, her friendships, yet we see none of that. It's just told to us as it is to her, and we just have to accept these labels as fact without ever seeing so for ourselves and move on. If you're going to do an origin story, that means doing a decent origin on the character you're origining. But I guess I shouldn't expect any less from a movie that decides to introduce the Marvel equivalent of Superman in a prequel and then has to phone in some half-assed excuse to why she hasn't been helping the entire time. She gives Nick Fury a pager at the end and instructs to only call her when it's an emergency. So I guess the numerous times the world was about to be destroyed throughout the entire series doesn't qualify as an emergency? Not the rampage from an alien army in New York? Not a psychotic robot nearly succeeding in obliterating all life on Earth? Not even Thanos? The writers did not think anything through when making Captain Marvel. And it's relatively entertaining at face value, sure, but taking 2 seconds to think about choices made and what's happening makes the whole thing fall apart, and it's just pointless. She works far better as a side character in Endgame, and she's barely even in it. The first female-led MCU movie could have and should have been so much better, but it wasn't. It's so shocking because this was later in the franchise when the movies were improving overall, but this is just all sorts of terrible. None of these movies are perfect, there's always something to nitpick somewhere. But it's so hard for me to find any redeeming qualities in Captain Marvel, which makes it my choice for the worst film as of right now in the MCU. Ugh, yikes. These were really painful to think about. Let's move on and end on a high note. Number 3, Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Like the third worst, I'm having a similar issue where my first 2 choices are fairly set and the rest towards the top are all on about the same level, so I had to pick which one I personally find to be more enjoyable, and for me that is Guardians of the Galaxy 2. The first Guardians of the Galaxy was very unique in how it presented a superhero film, and the second one continues in a similar fashion, but we don't need to spend a good chunk of the movie introducing our main characters, because we already know and care about them. Even the side characters are thoroughly fleshed out and given great backstory and motivations for what they're doing, and it makes everyone a lot more interesting, with one of the more standout villains of the series. Most of the others in the series are just evil people doing evil things for the sake of being evil. But this one actually has a personality and gives us a reason to want them defeated other than just simply sporting the antagonist label. And I'll be honest, this one has Baby Groot. I'm a simple person with simple tastes, and I just like cute things, okay? Number 2, Thor Ragnarok. Just when we thought there was no hope for our poor Thunder Boy, Taika Waititi pretty much swoops in and saves the Thor series because it was obviously not doing well up until this point. Thor Ragnarok came at a time when the MCU finally got into their groove and learned from their previous mistakes of making their films too serious without the entertainment and charm of a comic book movie. And best of all, we don't have boring humans dragging down the entire movie about a literal god. It's just fun and exciting with interesting characters, the complete opposite of the first 2 Thor movies, to the extent that it almost doesn't feel possible to be part of the same trilogy. It's more like a soft reboot for the character, and one that was very sorely needed. Thor Ragnarok was one of the few MCU films I watched before my binge fest leading up to the release of Avengers Endgame, because not only did it manage to get me hyped to watch, but I didn't really need to watch the first 2 Thor movies beforehand since it doesn't bother with previous planned characters and settings, which is something I especially appreciate. It's got some issues here and there, as all these movies do, but it's a great time and definitely one of my MCU favorites. Number 1, Avengers Infinity War. And no one was surprised by this choice. I should mention, I am not a comic book person. I have never had any attachment or nostalgia of any kind towards any of these characters. But Avengers Infinity War had me so invested in everyone. It has literally all the characters but manages them well so the movie doesn't feel overstuffed, largely because everyone has an amazing chemistry with each other. It's a perfect example of a good way to subvert expectations because we don't expect to see the ending happen the way it does. We always expect the heroes to save the day and defeat the villain by the end, but that doesn't happen. The tone is very dark a lot of the time, but there's a decent amount of jokes to balance it out, so it's not too serious all the time. Some of the best scenes this franchise has to offer are its group fight scenes, whether the characters are fighting with or against each other, and they've nearly perfected it by the time we get to Infinity War. This is part 1 of the grand finale the entire series was building to over the course of a decade, or I guess what should have been the finale. Really don't think there's going to be anywhere to go from here or any threat for our heroes to face that's going to be nearly on the same level as Thanos, especially now that their 2 biggest heroes aren't in the picture anymore, but I digress. Although Infinity War and Endgame both work well on their own, and Infinity War is also slightly better than Endgame in my opinion, for me it almost feels like an incomplete experience to watch them separately. My most memorable theater experience was the final battle in Endgame in a sold-out viewing on opening day. Being surrounded by such passionate fans, the excitement, the energy, it was indescribable. And Infinity War and Endgame are so excellent, I kind of wish they decided to just end the franchise there. It would have been both a perfect send-off for these characters and a fantastic conclusion to the MCU. But even so, watching Infinity War still gets me hyped watching it like no other superhero film does, and I can't imagine anything ever replacing it as my favorite. And there you have it. Now I can stop pretending like my opinion matters on a series where I'm not the target demographic and I don't have to worry about the entirety of the MCU franchise looming over me. At least until Phase 4 starts. Thank you everyone for watching, and now I would like to hear your thoughts. What are your most and least favorite of the Marvel Cinematic Universe films? Have you even seen any of them, or are you like me and not likely to watch most of them unless someone drags you to a showing? Let me know what you think in the comments, especially with this new type of video, and tell me if you have any suggestions for movies I should discuss and review in the future. If you did have a fun time with this video, I would very much appreciate it if you gave it a like, and if you'd like to stick around to see more reviews and other content I've got on my channel, that would be excellent as well. And until next time, I will see you folks later. Bye!